With chapter 19, the fifth book begins. This book contains 7 chapters of narration and concludes with the fifth discourse, the Olivet Discourse. Chapter 19 opens with Jesus leaving Galilee for Judea. In Judea, the Pharisees ask Jesus on his views on divorce. They do so by asking, in accordance with the school of Hillel, if a man may legitimately divorce his wife for any reason. At the time, what constituted legitimate reasons for divorce was debated. The school of Hillel held that a husband could divorce his wife simply because he was displeased with his wife. The school of Shammai disagreed with Hillel and restricted the reason for divorce to a wife's sexual immorality. While there was a debate on divorce, Hahn comments, the Pharisees were not receptive to Jesus' position since, as stated in chapter 12, the Pharisees had decided to destroy him. One indication of this intent is that the Pharisees asked Jesus this question before a large crowd in the same general place where John the Baptist had incurred King Herod's wrath for opposing King Herod's divorce of his wife and marriage to his brother's wife. Instead of answering the Pharisees directly, Jesus responds with a question, asking whether they recall the passage from Genesis chapter 2 about a man leaving his parents to become one flesh with his wife. Since God teaches Jesus, who will to unite a man and a woman together in marriage as one flesh, it is foolish, comments Hahn, to think that man has the power to separate this divine union. Moses tolerated divorce not because he had the power to divide what God had united, but rather because of the Israelites' hardness of heart. It is not clear what Jesus meant by allowing an exception to his teaching against divorce, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for unchastity and marries another commits adultery, and he who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Hahn and Mitch identify 3 main Catholic interpretations: the Church Fathers, Levitical, and no comment. According to the Church Fathers' view, Hahn and Mitch write, Jesus allowed for divorce in cases of serious sexual sin such as adultery, but he never permitted remarriage after divorce. The spouses may separate in these circumstances by legal arrangement of living apart, but they cannot break the marriage bond, and they are not free to remarry. The Levitical position maintains that the phrase except for unchastity refers to invalid marriages where the spouses are too closely related. The phrase is equivalent to, except where unlawful unions exist. Unlawful unions entail marriages among near-blood relations. Since these unions are invalid unions, their unions ought to be severed because of the impediment posed by near-blood relations. According to the no-comment position, because Jesus is revoking the Old Testament concession on divorce, he brackets the whole issue and sets it off to the side as irrelevant. Thus, except for unchastity means regardless of the Old Testament grounds for divorce. An additional 4th view that Hahn cites is the betrothal view. This position maintains that the exception clause refers to a man and woman who are betrothed, married legally, but who have not yet consummated their marriage through sexual union. Infidelity that takes place prior to the consummation of the marriage is legitimate grounds for a divorce. The disciples respond to Jesus' teaching against divorce by concluding, "It is not expedient to marry." In turn, Jesus responds with, "Not all men can receive this precept, but only those to whom it is given." Then he describes 3 types of people who do not marry: eunuchs by birth, eunuchs who have been castrated by others, and eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The second kind of eunuch, explains Hahn, were prisoners of war who were forcefully castrated and then made slaves who guard their masters' harems. According to Hahn, at the time, the first 2 types of eunuchs, by birth and by others, were the only types that existed. The third, instituted by Jesus, is like the second in that the third kind of eunuchs are appointed by Jesus, their Lord, to be celibate servants who guard Jesus' bride, the church. Priests, as celibate servants are not only guardians and servants, but also are married to the church. Consecrated virgins are married to the church as virgin brides, and celibate priests are married to the church as celibate husbands. Understood in this way, the third kind of eunuchs are called to fulfill the first commandment of the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. a commandment to marriage by spiritually marrying the church and seeking to be spiritually fruitful. In accordance with this understanding, Father Menard writes, celibacy is not meant to suppress love relationships. Rather, abstaining from marriage, the most natural setting of such relationships, the person tries to extend the intimacy of these contexts to all men. The proper context for this extension is to take place is, writes Father Menard, community living, the end for which true celibacy is undertaken, its only purpose. In community, it becomes possible to fulfill our calling to love one another as Christ has loved us. When the third kind of eunuch, those who are spiritually married, live out their vocations in a spousal manner, it is, continues Father Menard, in a certain sense better than physical marriage, since the reality it prefigures and that it attempts to live here and now is the final and definitive human reality. The reality is heaven, where men and women neither marry nor are given in marriage. Unlike earthly marriage, the spiritual marriage of the saints to Jesus and through Jesus to one another is a higher kind of marriage than earthly marriage, since it is unmarked by death. Physical marriages always contain death, since a physical marriage is part of the natural cycle of procreation and of death. The spiritual marriage, however, explains Father Menard, begins, I quote, a new existence, marked by the incorruptibility of a new creation, and of the unbelievable fertility of the kingdom of God. This third kind of eunuch, in both its male and female expressions, writes Father Menard, is a sign of what the community of men will be in the resurrection, when their interrelations will be totally universal, at the same time deeply personal, while the genital aspect of sexuality, linked by both creation, procreation, and death, will have already been overcome. Both spiritual marriage and physical marriage bring out in their own unique way a dimension of heavenly reality. For while, continues Father Menard, marriage is the signal of the exclusively personal intensity and uniqueness of the heavenly community, celibacy better manifests its universality and its victory over time and death. The exclusiveness that physically married couples are to live out is expressed in a spiritual marriage by one human being, body and soul, being exclusively joined to the corporate reality of the church, which would be betrayed if the celibate or virgin became fixated on a member who takes up part of the corporate reality. This spiritual adultery is expressed by undue affection and/or sexual activity proper to a physical marriage. With that stated, the third kind of eunuchs may have special friendships, counsels Father Menard, I quote, as long as they are of a wholesome kind, are always acceptable, and are open to all. As intended by Jesus, the perfect celibate, virginal chastity is, asserts Father Menard, too, I quote, to be lived as a living, loving experience, rather than as a limiting experience, as a gift of fullness more than a privation. As applied to priests, Father Menard explains that as broken bread offered to all men and women, it is fitting that the priest never gives his heart to no one person. His role as intermediary between God and man, as confidant and confessor, makes it difficult to admit the intimate presence of a woman into his life. Jesus' teachings on marriage and celibacy are followed by affirming the presence of children. He then turns his attention to the dangers of earthly wealth. In this section, Jesus invites his disciples to the counsels of perfection. These counsels, including selling what one owns, giving the proceeds to the poor, and then following Jesus more closely, are intended to, comments Hahn, I quote, remove all the impediments and obstacles on the way to love. The earthly goods are given up so as to choose wholeheartedly what is best and encourage others to choose what is best, life in Jesus Christ. The radical giving up of property and a future family is not, though, for all, but is, when rightly understood, affirms Hahn, the highest and holiest calling someone can receive, but may not necessarily be what is best in the individual case. Hahn points to verses in the letter to the Romans that aid in discerning what form of life Jesus is calling one to. For by the grace given to me, I bid every one among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith which God has assigned him. For as in one body we have many members, and all the members do not have the same functions. Romans 12, 3-4. Those who are given a grace to give up worldly possessions to follow Jesus more closely are not inspired to do so because the love of the created world is evil. As the first chapter of Genesis teaches, God created a good world for Adam and Eve and their descendants to desire, but not in an idolatrous manner, as if the created world is the ultimate end. Love of God as the perfect uncreated good is to be prioritized over the good created world, which we are to love, asserts Father Bernard, in order to save by participating in Jesus' mission of completing, fulfilling, and redeeming creation. One who is rich like the rich young man in the gospel passage prioritizes what is merely good over what is best, God. It is proud to refuse to properly order love of the created world to the love of God. This pride, comments Benedict XVI, is like a camel which is unable to pass, I quote, through the eye of a needle, since it sticks its proud hump up, so to speak, and is thus unable to get through the gate of merciful kindness. Those who prioritize following Jesus' godly ways over the pursuit of created goods will, promises Jesus, sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. In other words, explains Bergsma, they will in Jesus be a new Israel that will in this earthly life prepare for the full manifestation of the kingdom of heaven. The 12 apostles, their successors, the bishops, and the dioceses associated with bishops are in a particular way, writes Bergsma, I quote, new tribes of a new people of Israel that sacramentally shine forth on earth the heavenly kingdom.